Hello. Okay, so I'm going to be doing a series of videos on the Enlightenment. So first things first, why do I want to do a series of videos on the Enlightenment? I think it's because there is a lot of aspects to um, philosophy and our nature of it that or the nature of our understanding of it that a lot of people don't know. And that includes a lot of people that are um, anarchists like myself that are, very vehement about their opinions on what they think the world should look like and rights and the rights of individuals and so on, but not really knowing where it came from. That being said, I think you can come to these conclusions without having to know all the history behind it. I just think it's fascinating, and I think it kind of helps people get a better grasp on why they have such strong opinions if they know the progression of the ideas. So I'm going to say that the Enlightenment, this is kind of my own definition. I'm going to say that the Enlightenment started in 1453 and ended in 1815. So why did I pick those dates as a start and an end? I'll get to that really quickly. Apparently I only have about 20 minutes of space on my phone to record this anyway, so I do have to kind of keep this short, which is why occasionally for other videos too, one of the reasons why I'm going to be kind of going back and forth talking about other books that I've already maybe covered before, just because that sometimes, a lot of times they're going to relate, and partly that's just how my brain works. So all right, so 1453. What happened in 1453? The Byzantine Empire was conquered by the Turks. Constantinople was evacuated, more or less, and the city was occupied. So what happened at that time was that you had a lot of books that were kept in safekeeping in either monasteries, other churches, private libraries, and so on, that then came back into Western Europe as a part of people leaving. They brought these books with them, or they were hidden somewhere, or given to someone else. Also, not to make it seem that that everybody and all the knowledge was just simply because they're fleeing from the Turks. Also, a lot of these works, because of that buffer zone of Byzantium not being there, there was now more direct interaction between the Islamic world and Western Europe, and that these Islamic libraries also had plenty of works of the ancient world mythology, history, and so on that were then bought and then brought into Europe also. So that's kind of where I'm saying that was the point I'm getting to, is that was the sort of spark of it, was this event, for better or for worse, for obviously the people living there, but there was good that came about from this collapse. And then, so the end point, 1815, is the Battle of Waterloo and the defeat of Napoleon. Why did I pick that date? More or less because it's not so much that Napoleon was a champion of Enlightenment philosophy exactly, or that he was some sort of a libertarian. He wasn't, but most definitely was not. But the part of his propaganda that he was using to conquer these different monarchies in Europe was, I'm doing this to get rid of monarchy, even though he was simply a monarch himself by a different term. Instead of saying king, he called himself an emperor. And then once he was defeated at Waterloo, then essentially these different monarchies tried to regress the world to before the Enlightenment, almost tried to make it seem as if it didn't happen. It was called, that period after the Enlightenment was called the Reformation, actually. Or not the Reformation, the Restoration, excuse me. Misspoke there a little bit. Either way, so that's why I picked those dates, and so everything in this video series is going to be, I'm going to try to keep it within those 2 dates. So, like I said, I'm going to try to do each video on either a single work or a individual that may have done multiple works that, you know, I think kind of move this Enlightenment forward. So the first things first, how do I then define the Enlightenment? This is the best. I have a cat trying to climb a curtain. Okay, he gave up and jumped down. He got a good 2 feet up. It's impressive. But yeah, so this is my definition of the Enlightenment. It's the period of time that science was set free of the dogma of, I wouldn't say just the Catholic Church, because I don't want to be one of those people that like, oh, the Catholic Church is just evil and religion is bad, and no, because I don't see the world as that it's either, you know, atheism or religion, and one is evil and the other one is good, or vice versa. I just don't see the world like that. But there was definitely, you know, an authoritarian nature of the Catholic Church, and also not just the Catholic Church, but there was, you know, definitely your local superstitions of things like, oh, well, we can't do this because, well, it's been done this way for generations, or we always do it this way for the same reason. So we're seeing the Enlightenment as freeing science from these dogmas and superstitions. And you can couple that also with, at the same time, some of these scientists were also philosophers, or vice versa. You know, a lot of these philosophers were kind of part-time also dabbling in little experiments, you know. I mean, this is kind of where you get the term Renaissance man, is that you had these very fascinating individuals that were doing both science and philosophy, thinking about, you know, the important part of thinking about thinking, and then, you know, applying these thoughts to, well, okay, how does this work then, right? So we begin to assert our rights as individuals in the process of the Enlightenment. You know, challenging the local overlords by asking why. I think that is a fundamental part to the nature of liberty, is being able to ask why. Incredibly important. If you can't ask why, you can't ask why you have chains on you, and you can't ask yourself, why do I think I should be free? So, why is incredibly important. And I'll get more into that probably a little bit later on as I'm describing the Corpus Hermeticum, also known as the Hermetica, and I'm probably just going to address it as that to save myself some syllables. I'm a little bit, you know, this is the first video I've actually just kind of done by myself, so it might come off as a little bit spacey, might jump back and forth a little bit. I kind of already do that anyways, so this first video will be a little rough. I apologize. So why did I pick the Hermetica as a start for all this? Well, it's because the Hermetica was one of those books that came back to Western Europe as a part of, you know, the collapse of Byzantium, and how it became that spark was this. So you had an individual in Florence by the name of Cosimo de' Medici, who was, him and his grandson later on were more or less responsible for everything that we think of as Renaissance Florence. The art, the architecture, they were the biggest patrons of all that at the time in that city. So Cosimo de' Medici, you know, I guess was hearing rumors of all these books flooding out of the East. And, you know, why would that attract the attention of somebody that had a lot of money? Is because books were incredibly valuable back then. You know, you have, there was a point during medieval Europe that there was only about 4 or 5 copies of the Iliad in all of Western Europe, which it's really kind of amazing to think about it. You know, because, you know, we just think of like books as like, oh, there's thousands of them everywhere, and there kind of are, and that's, the number's changing because obviously people, you know, download it on a Kindle or something like that, so you don't actually have to lug around a bunch of books with you. So the Hermetica does broach that question of why. It is a very esoteric work, as in there's just these very vague statements that you can't really know for sure. And I think if anybody says they know for sure what it means, they're maybe a little bit full of themselves. I've got my own interpretation of what I think it means, but I can't say certainly that I know exactly what these quotes that I took out of here for this video actually mean. I can just guess at it. So because of this reciprocity that's addressed so much in the Hermetica, one thing is caused by another, and then that is really just a part of the other thing, and the other thing is just a little bit a part of that. That's how you get, you know, this questioning of why, because you can't, you know, you almost can't even read it without asking why, you know. So Cosimo de' Medici was paying people to find these different books, and he paid a monk by the name of, let me find the guy's name here really quick, Alberti de' Candy. Who is Alberti de' Candy? Guess what? This is the quick part. Nobody really knows as far as I could tell, other than he was paid by Cosimo de' Medici to find these books. And he found the Hermetica. He brought it back to Florence, and it was given to another monk by the name of Marcio Ficino, who then translated it into Latin and Etruscan Italian, which is very interesting in itself that it was actually translated into Italian, because there were so many different dialects at the time that it was almost Italy kind of starting to become its own there at that point. But that's, you know, plenty of people well, can speak more to it on that, and I'm not going to do that here. So I guess I should just carry on into the quotes out of this and go from there. So the first quote out of this book that I thought was really interesting is I'm going to read this a couple times to really get this through, because it's very dense. This was how I read this was from a translation into English that was written in 1650. So it's a little bit, it's Old English plus very esoteric. So it's a little hard to read, but it was very fascinating. All right, so the first quote here is, "For the one haseth to which is good, but the other is a neighbor to the things that are evil, and that which is good desireth to be set at liberty, but the things that are evil love bondage and slavery." I'll read it again, just to see if I even read it correctly the first time. Like I said, the Hermetica is 90 pages and incredibly dense. It took me a good month to read 2 months to read a 90-page book because of almost having to restart a whole chapter over again to understand whoever wrote it is talking about. Okay, so "For the one haseth to which is good, but the other is neighbor to the things that are evil, and that which is good desireth to be at liberty, but the things that are evil love bondage and slavery." So a common theme again in the Hermetica is reciprocity. One thing relates to another, which is part of another and a smaller part of a whole, and so on. So with that starting little quote of it, that I think it's very interesting that the word liberty is used as being connected directly to things that are good. So there's a start right there. So the Hermetica is a large part of what is called Hermetic philosophy. And it's called Hermetic philosophy because the Hermetica is supposed to be written by Hermes, as in the god Hermes. So take that for what you will. The oldest translation of this is supposedly from the 7th century. And there's a cat. But it claims to be, or there's a lot of people that claim it to be much older, as in it's supposedly older than Egypt. And I have a really hard time believing that. This is Worms, by the way. He's co-hosting. So the first principle is it all starts in the mind. So what does that mean exactly? Well, it means that your mind, at least what I believe it to mean, is that your mind is obviously what you use to interpret the world and react to it. So, and also your ability to see how the world works. So it's not as if like you're creating the universe in your mind, but that because of how you interpret it is how you react to it. So I guess I'll leave it there. That's the first of the Hermetic principles. That's the short of it. It all starts in the mind. You can go from there yourself. Number 2, as above, so below. Again, reciprocity, one thing is a part of another. Cat butt. So what's a more little bit longer definition of that would be a physical example, and that would be, say, a tree. The branches and leaves of a tree, as they are up in the sky, if you were to, say, take the tree out of the ground and dissolve the soil around it, you'd see that the root structure kind of mirrors the branches that are above the ground. And that's kind of the, as above, so below, that's kind of the, really the only part about Hermetic philosophy that's kind of like commonly heard, as above, so below. The third Hermetic principle is everything moves in vibration. And you kind of go, oh wow. At least I thought, everything moves in vibration. So this is supposed to be this was supposed to be written hundreds, if not thousands, of years ago, and they're saying that everything moves and that it vibrates. Well, it's really interesting that we know from modern science that, yeah, everything is moving all the time. It doesn't look like it is, but the little atoms have a little electrons going around it, and they're moving around. Everything is moving, and it's moving so fast that it really just appears to be vibrating. So it's very kind of wild that something that was written thousands of years ago is saying that. The other couple of the other principles are really almost the same. Number 4 is rhythm, or number 4 is polarity and opposites. So again, reciprocity, one thing is a part of another. Number 5 is rhythm, one thing affects another, so they all interrelate, rhythm. So 6 is cause and effect. One act does make something else happen, so that kind of relates to Isaac Newton, I think, who, by the way, most definitely read not only the Hermeticum or the Hermetica, but also the other part of Hermetic philosophy, which is just a one-page thing called the Emerald Tablet, also supposed to be written thousands of years ago. And then the last one I think is pretty interesting, because there's multiple different ways to interpret this one, and that is one of the principles is, the last principle rather, I'm sorry, is gender. So masculine and feminine. Not necessarily talking about people's chromosomes as to whether or not somebody is masculine or feminine, or how their chemicals work in their brain. I don't think that's what they're referring to here, but rather the aspects of humanity that are masculine and the aspects of humanity that are feminine are also mirrored in the natural world, and I can kind of see where they get that impression. I mean, it's definitely so common in human society that there are things that are masculine, there are things that are feminine, and they interrelate. And because we need both for society to work correctly, again, that relates to reciprocity. Okay, there's I'm going to skip a bunch of these quotes here, which I may, I don't know, maybe do a second part for this. I don't know. But one of the ones I thought was very interesting relates to the fact that Hermetic philosophy ties in really closely to the concept of alchemy. The people who are allegedly crazy and thinking that they could turn base metals into gold. They believe that inside the Hermetica was essentially, it was describing a philosophy, but also how to do transmutation. Literally, they thought that it was like dual meanings, that you could see both, and one would relate to the other, and you could figure out how to transmute things by simply almost like finding the code inside the Hermetica. So one that I think relates to that, I thought was pretty cool, because of it's pretty unique. So there's a part in there, and I'm not going to quote it because it was too long, but it says that there is a bear that holds the world up. And I thought to myself, I go, bear that holds the world up. That's kind of weird for uh, Greek mythology. You know, there's not really too many references to bears. I mean, they're there, but it's not too common. And I go, bear that holds the world up. And it made me think that we don't really we don't look at the sky as much as we used to as a whole. I'm not saying, you know, that everybody doesn't look up at the sky, but most people don't, simply just because if you live in a city or even in a lot of urban areas, there's too many lights and you can't really see the sky. But back then, the sky was much more common in people's life all the time. So I thought about the bear that holds the world up, and I go, okay. I wonder if the North Star is what they're referring to, and of course, the bear, the North Star is in the constellation of Ursa Minor. So yeah, I thought that was actually, like, I did find a dual meaning in there. There's another quote in here, really quickly, that I'll just paraphrase. One thing that is stronger will move something else that is weaker. I think that relates to physics and Isaac Newton, who, like I said, did read it. That Isaac Newton video will be coming, like I said, probably next year or something, depending on how quickly I can actually find time to do these videos. I guess I'll just skip to, because the time is getting a little bit short here. They'll just skip to the last two that I did here. The Hermetica is written like this, that it's written as is almost teachings from Hermes to his sons, Tat and Asclepius. So to put this quote in context there, so it makes a little bit more sense. This world, O son, worship and adore, and the only service of God is the only service of God is not to be evil. So I thought that kind of related to the non-aggression principle of just simply to, you know, be closer to God or something like that, is to just not be evil. You know, don't tell people what to do. Don't, you know, be malicious. I liked it. I thought it related. Again, I really did, as reading this, I could see like little pinpricks of a start to what became the Enlightenment. And then the last one really doesn't relate to the Enlightenment so much as that I just thought it was probably the most fascinating one out of there, because it is almost gibberish. But, you know, if you can find something out of this one, do. Okay, so death, I'm quoting here, so death is an empty word, or else it is wrongly called death by taking away the first letter instead of immortal. So what? I don't know either. It could be that this was originally Greek, or the work was originally translated from Greek into Latin, and then the translation I read was from Latin into, you know, kind of Old English. So what happened there, I don't know, but that's fascinating. I'll just read it one more time. Death is an empty word, or else it is wrongly called death by taking away the first letter instead of immortal. So I don't know. And then I was really never able to figure out whether or not maybe Tat was just a different name for Asclepius, because I haven't been able to find like any sort of other reference to anybody called Tat ever. So where I intend to go from here is, at first I was going to go from here, or from the Hermetica, to then jump into Machiavelli and the Prince, not because I think Machiavelli was some sort of really Enlightenment philosopher, but more that I was trying to see an opposite, you know, to show the example of like, this is the world that we're leaving. Turns out Machiavelli wasn't really that bad, and we'll cover him in a later video. But what I ended up finding, and what the next video is going to be on, or maybe not the next video, but or at least the next work, is going to be the next video. I'm going to do this on, or at least I'm repeating myself. Sorry. The next subject is going to be the Oration on the Dignity of Man by Giovanni Pico della Mirandola. And he was running around with the same crowd of monks as Mircea Ficino and De Candy, which, by the way, most of those men were gay, so a good part of the beginning of the Enlightenment was actually kind of spearheaded by gay men. So, I thought that was kind of fascinating. This Oration on the Dignity of Man, I haven't quite finished reading it yet, but it is a real gem. I had never even heard of it before, stumbled upon it while reading about Lorenzo de Medici, and this guy was one of his friends, and read this oration, and it was so far really quite amazing. So that'll be in, if not the next video, the one after that, because I may make this whole thing about the Hermetica into 2 parts, but I'm kind of thinking I'll just ramble on a lot more. So if you didn't enjoy this video, they may get better, they may not. If anything, this may just be for me, so I almost have like my notes in like a video form of some sort. So take it easy, and I'll see you next time. I guess I'm gonna call this Mike on the Enlightenment. So, all right, goodbye.